Continuing now our look ahead to 2011 here in the nation's capital. When Republicans take control of the House and add to their numbers in the U.S. Senate next year, Washington will return to divided government. Is it a recipe for gridlock or a chance, perhaps, for some bipartisan cooperation? And what does it all mean for investors? Ann Mathias is Director of Research at MF Global here in Washington. She joins me in the studio. Good to see you, Ann. And
nice to see you, too.
I want to ask you about the lame duck session that we just had and how that's changed the outlook for next year, because a lot of people expected nothing would get done in this lame duck. Instead, they got a lot done. What does that mean?
Well, I think it's more important to look at how things got done. We were of the camp that a lot would get done, that it would be very late, that it would be very pushed, and we expected it to be a bit more fractious, a bit more contentious than it actually ended up being. I think this lame duck was certainly extremely productive, and they often are, but it was less rancorous than we had expected. It was much more bipartisan. There were several things that went through on unanimous consent. The tax deal, although there were some notable opponents to it, actually moved through. A Senate vote was very, very bipartisan. So I think you're coming out of the lame duck with more of a spirit of bipartisanship than you could have possibly anticipated. And I think that actually sets things up pretty decently for next year.
At the same time, you're getting some new faces next year
Right.
who have offered some pretty tough language about the president's health care law, repealing that, trying to cut spending. Where do you see areas for cooperation then in the short term next year, areas of cooperation that might affect the business community and investors?
Sure. I think one of the very first areas of cooperation we might see is in trade. One of my colleagues, Joanne Thornton, who does all of our trade policy work, has said free trade agreements are one area where there's an economic support to it. It's a way to talk about getting jobs and getting the economy moving again. There are enough conservative Democrats who support trade, and then you will have a larger number of Republicans who are traditional trade supporters.
Are you talking about beyond just the Korea deal? You're talking about Colombia, Panama, more?
Panama, possibly other types of agreements, a closer working relationship internationally, more focus on Asia as well, working out trade agreements in Asia. I think trade is going to be an area that we could see a lot of fruitful work in Congress. And I think that's very important to the investment community today. There are other areas, a large area where I think the odds are lower, but at least we could see some progress is in corporate tax reform. There's been a commitment all around the base to lower the corporate tax rate from 35% at the top end, move it down, spread the base out, reduce some of the preference items and some of the sort of structural problems with the corporate tax code. And I think that could be very positive for more for domestic U.S. companies that have most of their business here in the U.S., such as services companies, restaurant companies, food companies, things like that, and less positive. That's a less positive development for major pharma, major tech, who have been some of the most excitable opponents of any changes to the offshore
They're taking
versions.
advantage of
Right.
so many
They're
of those
taking
tax breaks that are on the books
Exactly.
right now for multinationals.
That's
This is
right.
a topic we talked about yesterday as well. What about other sectors here? A lot of focus on defense. Robert Gates has said the Defense Department, listen, I know our defense budget isn't going to grow at the way it has grown, but we still expect it to grow in real terms. There's some Democrats talking about cutting the defense budget. The Deficit
Right.
Commission talked about that. Defense contractors, are they going to take a hit?
I think some of them may. A lot of the focus on the cutting is going to be waste, fraud, and abuse. That's certainly the top area where you can get everybody to agree. I mean, who isn't against waste, fraud, and abuse? But you might see Gates trying to push his agenda a little bit more. He has had a long-term vision about military procurement, that it should be focused more on battlefield-ready, quicker-to-market solutions and less on large platform programs. So large platform players may see a little more less optimistic market. But you know, we have a huge geopolitical challenge. We've got a war going on in Afghanistan. We're tailing out of Iraq. There are conflicts around the globe. To see a massive reduction in military spending is unlikely. You could see something like the $100 billion over 10-year cut that they have been talking about in the Deficit Reduction Commission, probably reducing that somewhat, but that's definitely going to be an area.
Well, we've talked already in this hour about health care. What do you see as the real end of the road fate of the president's health care legislation? And in this next Congress, how successful are Republicans in defunding that? And again, what's the impact on companies?
Sure. I think the risk on the health care front, the risk to the president's health care plan, to the whole totality of it, that rests right now in the courts. The judicial risk is much bigger, and that's much worse for insurance companies. The idea that a Republican Congress, Republican House could pass a bill repealing health care, but Obama's still the president. He has to sign it, and you know he won't.
All right. And Mathias, appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
Washington Research Group here for MF Global. Appreciate it. It's going to be a busy year for you, I know.